Good evening, everybody. This is Josh Beiser from Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. Welcome to another weekly episode of the Perceptive Podcast. Got another great cast for you this week. I seem to be slowly but surely interviewing everyone at Failbetter Games. And we have two more of the fine folks there on tonight to talk a little bit more about the work they do, Fall in London, and of course, another great discussion on narrative design, writing, and of course the work that goes into these great games. But let's welcome them onto the cast. First, please welcome narrative director Olivia.
Hello.
Hello, Olivia. And please welcome writer at Failbetter, James.
Hi.
Hi, James. It's great to have both of you on tonight.
Thank you.
Really happy to be here.
Well, I just said I seem to be systematically interviewing everyone at Failbetter at this rate. Is there anyone else I haven't gotten to yet so I can add them to my list for after this cast?
If you haven't got our narrative director, Chris, you should, because he's a genius, and he'd be really embarrassed by me saying that, and that's probably one of my goals for tonight, is however many times I can compliment him until he melts. But yeah, you should totally try and get him.
Chris Gardner. I'm sorry. You mean Chris Gardner?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I've certainly talked to him a few times.
Cool.
We've had I think each time we've had him on, somehow the discussion gets around to Dark Souls at some point. I think he's the originator of that. Every time we have a cast, someone has to bring up Dark Souls, and it's usually him.
I'm surprised it's not Liam, but yeah.
So, Chris, Liam, if you're watching, please let me know what you think of Dark Souls. You can add that in the comments below. But for tonight, it's great to have both of you on. Like I just said, we'll be talking more about the work you guys do at Failbetter, and of course, what's going on with Fall in London and those games. Now, last time I spoke with Cash, we talked briefly about Sunless Skies. Now, for those of you who missed that cast, that is going to be the next game in the Fall in London universe. I know you guys are planning on doing a Kickstarter for that. Now, we are recording this just in early December. And by the time you're hearing this, it will most likely be the end of December, early January. So for the folks listening, is there any updates or anything new you would like to mention about Sunless Skies?
It's going to be so cool. The nice thing about being on the content team where I am is I don't actually get input much at this stage. Mm-hmm. But every so often we get to see what they're talking about and what they're thinking about. And it's so exciting. I have no idea what I'm allowed to tell you, so that's literally all I'm going to say. But it's going to be a brilliant game. Already, you can just tell this. And as an English person, actually saying that means something because we're not allowed to boast, not allowed to be proud. So, yeah, very excited about it.
All right. James, do you have anything to add?
Pretty much the same. As soon as Chris sat me down back in July and told me what the concept of the game was, I was so excited that was something I'm going to be working on. But yeah, I'm not sure what I can say at this point, only that it's going to be so cool.
Awesome. Can't wait to hear more about it and, of course, see the Kickstarter when it comes up. Now, obviously, one question I have to ask. Has there been any ideas regarding when you guys are playing the Kickstarter, or is that still up in the air at the moment?
The best person to ask about that is Hannah, probably on Twitter, or just ask on Twitter because she mans that along with Hayley. I don't know the exact dates. It's early next year, but I'm not sure when.
Gotcha. All right. Now, I do have one question about sort of how things have developed with the studio, but I want to start with introductions, and then we'll come back to it. So, since this is both of yours first time on the cast, I always like to start with giving you a chance to introduce yourselves, talk a little bit about your role and your background. And either of you can feel free to start, Who wants to go first?
I nominate James.
Okay. I'm James Chu. I've been at Failbetter for about 10 months now. I started end of January. I came from a academic background. I just finished a master's when I started in medieval studies. And Failbetter was pretty much my first actual proper adult job, which has been amazing. It's been such a great year.
And what projects have you had a chance to work on so far, James?
So far, my first big content was the election in Fallen London, which was, we have a lot of kind of seasonal festivals in Fallen London, like we have a Valentine's Day Feast of the Exceptional Rose, we have Halloween, which is Hallowmas, and election was a new festival we introduced to kind of fill in the early to midsummer period. And that was fun. That was really different to what we normally do because it was something that would have ramifications just for a year, because the idea was you elect a new mayor of London and he or she will be around for a year. And we write content based on what the players chose kind of in real time almost. So that was really exciting and new and kind of terrifying.
All right. And Olivia, it's your turn, I guess.
Yeah, I'm slightly older than James, so I've got a slightly longer work history. I actually was in the games industry when I was 18. I worked on Time Splitters 2 as a QA person for IDOS. That was during my gap year. And then I went and thought, no, you're not allowed to do video games. It's not a proper job. Particularly women are not told at school. It's not anything you get career advice on. So I did various other things and finally clawed my way back. So I spent like a decade trying to get back into the games industry. I came from fiction publishing where I did sci-fi and fantasy editing. And I've been at Failbetter. I don't really know how long because I did freelancing for them first. So it feels like a lot longer than technically I've been an employee. But yeah, I've been around the houses to get here and I still love it. It's amazing here. It's the best job I've ever had. And I've had lots of jobs to prove that. So yeah.
Awesome. I remember playing Time Splitters back in the day too. That was another really great game. It was also one of like the few console FPSs back at that time to really feel right for the player using a controller.
Yeah, I mean, a bug report that I still feel slightly bitter about was at some stage someone sent in a ticket saying, Olivia can complete this game without dying, it's too easy, which is completely true because I am terrible at shooters, but yeah, it was a good game to work on. Nice.
Now, for your role at Failbetter, you say you're a narrative director, so does that mean you...
Narrative editor.
Narrative editor, I'm sorry. Does that mean you kind of oversee the writing and the storylines for all the games at Failbetter?
The entire content team is spread across everything. Like, we're not focused on just one game, which helps because all the lore is consistent across games. I don't really make up the stories that go across everything. That's Chris's role, where he guides and gives suggestions, and then people pitch things within the ideas he puts forward. What I do is I look at stories that are in kind of fetus form and see whether they're coherent within themselves, whether they have a convincing structure, whether they give the player room, whether it just feels like a good story that you want to read, and then that's developed by the writer.
Okay.
And then later on, I go back and do a line edit, which is just when I look at style and phrasing and ask really awkward questions like, you've used this word twice, can you give me a synonym, please? So I look at a bigger and a tiny fine-grained level.
Nice. Something tells me I don't want you to read my post on Game Wisdom, then, because I have a feeling you're going to have a whole lot of comments for me.
No one wants me to look at their work. That's my life. I'm the person no one wants to work with, but actually does.
Now, here's the question that I was thinking about earlier, and this is something I've been thinking about in the back of my mind since I've been talking to everyone at Failbetter. Now, for those of you listening to this cast, obviously Failbetter has certainly grown over the years. You guys have gone from your big name hit of Fallen London. I know you guys worked on another browser-based title, like a smaller one, and then, of course, developing things out further with Sunless Seas and now with Sunless Skies in the future. And as you just said, Olivia, while the studio's working on these multiple games, they're all part of this collective whole in terms of lore. And I just want to ask for both of you, like, how is it like writing or being a part of, essentially you're working on these multiple titles, but at the same time, it's still built within this one universe that I'm sure all of you really, at this point, must love writing for and building up. And we'll start with James this time.
Sure. It's occasionally I've likened it to being kind of like an archaeologist in terms of the lore, because I say it's spread across several games at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And at this point, we've had so many different voices working on content over the years. We had like Alexis Kennedy, Chris's contributions. We have some amazing freelancers like Richard Cobbett and Emily Short and Gavin Inglis working for us. And so it's kind of, you have to understand the lore
Mm-hmm.
and appreciate and understand the context of various things. And you also have to do quite a bit of digging to kind of find out kind of what are we using this year, say for a seasonal event.
Mm-hmm.
What have we done before? What's a kind of new, fresh, interesting take on this? Have we done this topic to death? There was a while back where we kind of had a few people on the forums complaining that oh God, it's cannibalism again. And then, having to kind of step back from that and kind of look at, well, what's a fresh perspective on these? I think it was the Pentecost apes. How can we make them fresh and exciting? So it's kind of being aware of what's come before you and kind of looking for fresh perspectives and fresh possibilities to keep things feeling exciting and innovating and making sure that nothing feels stale.
Mm-hmm. All right. And Olivia, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I'd kind of say that while in a way the massive size makes it harder to make sure you're not redoing things,
Mm-hmm.
from my perspective, it's quite a lot easier because I'm checking for continuity and consistency, and it's a lot easier for me to keep one world in my head than it is if I had to do 4 different worlds, and you'd confuse things. So while there's a lot more stuff to process to make sure you're writing about the right things, at least it's all just one world and I can memorize that rather than 4 different ones, and they could have different things in contradiction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's kind of interesting to see how like storytelling these days has been trying to approach this kind of universe kind of thing. I mean, we can easily jump into tangents like what Marvel and DC are doing these days, what major movies, TV shows, trying to build things around these universes to create something greater than the sum of their parts.
What's the question there?
No, just no question. Just
Okay.
something there. Now, here's a question that I want to ask for both of you again. As we said, the difference or the growth of Failbetter between like Fall in London to where we're at with the Sunless series has been embracing more, I guess, like hardcore game concepts, more action gameplay, the roguelike genre in particular with Sunless Skies, and I assume something along those lines with Sunless Skies. So, making that transition from a browser or very narrative-focused game to one that has more traditional elements, I just want to get your thoughts as people who play video games, and especially designing them, on what you think or how you felt about making that move to a more traditional kind of game design. And we'll start with Olivia this time.
For me, it's been really nice, as I have a lot of friends who are gamers but can't get into browser games. It's just not their thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got one friend who's got something like 200 hours in Sunless Sea, and this is not me prompting it. Every so often he'll send me messages going, "Oh my God, this thing, I hate you." And I'm just like, oh, I'm so happy. And it's nice to have people I know who are game players having access to something because they like traditional video games rather than browser games. Mm-hmm. So I really like that aspect of it. I don't have to worry too much about the design of the video game. Someone who's better at that than me does it. So it's not that there are significant differences, like in pacing, and we don't have to factor in actions of the player. We have different ways of judging the speed at which they're going to go through things. Mm-hmm. But it's not that different, actually, in a way that we design the content or write it. So I get the benefit of exposure to other people, which they wouldn't have seen otherwise, but not much of a downside. All
right. And James, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'd agree with what a lot of Olivia said. I find writing for them both, because I'm kind of behind the scenes, the kind of tools and the way we create content is quite similar. But kind of going from writing for London, where as the kind of writers do a lot of the design, a lot of the mechanics are contingent on us, to then kind of look at something like Submariner, which is what I was working on more recently. And being aware that kind of, well, then Liam, who you've spoken to, is also doing a lot of the behind the scenes mechanics, takes a little bit of pressure. You're not quite in the front seat to the same extent. And it's also, as a writer, kind of helpful because I was a player of Fall London for years and years. So kind of when I write for that, I'm thinking of my experiences kind of sat up late as a kind of uni student, kind of with candles and like playing until my next action refreshed. But whereas with Submariner, or I presume when we start making Sunless Skies, being able to kind of just load up the game and then kind of seeing the atmosphere, seeing what it looks like, seeing the environment is kind of really wonderful as a kind of tool that you can use to kind of inspire, spark off ideas and create content too.
Cool. Now, here's a question that so far I think I've asked everyone at Failbetter, and they've all given me the same answer. So I'm sure this will be very similar in our previous talks, but I gotta mention it here. And that, of course, is, as we just said, you guys have worked on several projects within the Fallen London universe, but with different games and designs. So I gotta ask, do you have a preferred title to write stories for? Or is it just all, one thing together? And either one of you, feel free to start for this one.
I'll probably be quite quick. I have only just gotten into the writing side of stuff for games because I'm technically a skilled editor rather than a writer. Mm-hmm. And so I've only written any significant content for Fallen London. But I did come into the company as a long-term diehard fan, and I was quite a major backer on Kickstarter for Sunless Skies. Mm-hmm. So I can only answer Fallen London because it's the only thing I've written any significant content chunks. But Sunless Skies is so pretty.
All right. And James?
Oh, tough one. Generally, I find Fallen London easy to write. Mm-hmm. I'm more familiar with it like Olivia. I was a long-time player before I became a writer for it. Mm-hmm. And as I was saying earlier, like it is been built up through so many voices. It's got a really established tone and way of expressing things, and the kind of content we create for it that makes it not safe ground, but you're more aware of what you're doing. Whereas I was moved on to Submariner, not to the same extent that Cash was, but that required a whole shift in kind of the possibilities and the tone and the pressure of the kind of content we were creating. It was meant to be kind of Sunless Skies, but more high octane. Mm-hmm. And so that was more challenging, which in some ways is more rewarding. Okay. But Fallen London's my love, so I really could go for either.
All right. I know when I asked, I think Liam and Cash that question, they were both like, they're both my babies. I can't choose between one of them. All right. Now, I guess moving on and talking a little bit more about things from a narrative and writing point of view. This is one of those topics I'm sure we don't hear too much about in the video game space. Again, as both of you are obviously aware of, video games have always been focused on the mechanics and the player interaction point of view. And it has been until like the last, I think it's been like maybe almost going on a decade at this point, that we really started to see games embrace narrative focus elements, the likes of Gone Home, Dear Esther, Her Story, and even with the greater appreciation for unique stories and storytelling, such as with Fallen London, and even in the RPG genre. So, with that said, I guess my question for both of you, and we'll start with Olivia this time, is as writers and people who are examining these stories, examining, what's good, what's bad, etc. I guess in your opinion, this is probably going to be either a very quick or very long answer. What makes a story, like in your opinions, like good, bad, or just indifferent?
Okay. I will kind of underline that I come from a background of genre fiction where it's very difficult not to be defensive about things like sci-fi and fantasy. I think stories can be immature, I think they can be silly, I think they can be ridiculous and unbelievable and still be good in that they can be powerful and have an impact on the person experiencing them, in that it could just be escapism. I think kind of categorizing stories as good and bad is dangerous because something can be beautifully written but leave you cold. Is that a good story or not?
Yeah.
I think within the world of gaming, I'd say a good story is one that gives you space to have an emotional response to it. But that's my personal opinion, and that's what I like getting from stories. Someone else could have a good story that's just well structured with no possible continuity issues. I mean, define good.
Yeah. I'm not even going to try and start that one. But It is a really good point, and just as you said, Olivia, we can draw parallels to that with game design. I've played some amazing games that are buggy and broken experiences. I've seen some games that have feature horrible gameplay or very basic ones, but from an execution standpoint are flawless. There's no bugs, everything works perfectly, and if we're not careful, I could easily get on a how do you review games rant for the next hour. So we gotta watch out for that. But it is a very hard process because, as you said, it can be anything, and the same can be said of video games. But before we talk a little bit more about that, James, do you have anything you would like to add?
Yeah, I think for me, the kind of most important thing for a game to have a good, with kind of heavy quotation marks here, story, is I think it has to, not wanting to kind of cast aspersions on any particular game, but kind of if you're just led through a string of cutscenes and all of the story happens kind of in a way the player can't really touch, it kind of passively happens to you, I don't think that's, however well written it is, or structured or paced, I don't think that's really making much use of the medium as an interactive space. I think kind of if it's asking questions of the player to respond to, the narrative doesn't necessarily, I think, have to kind of massively branch and kind of respond to every little thing you do, but I think it's that opening a space for you to kind of, like Olivia was saying, kind of express something, feel something, just allowing that kind of experience to kind of affect how the player responds, how the player feels. And I think that is what game stories should be striving for.
Yeah, and we have certainly been seeing those types of games in the indie space over the last few years. Stuff like, again, Dear Esther, Gone Home. One of my favorite games was To the Moon. Even though, again, getting back to saying what's a good game, what's a bad game, that title had almost next to none or very minimal gameplay, but it had such a hard-hitting story that really elevated along those lines. Now, I guess here's a question, another one for both of you. What are some examples of game stories or game narratives in particular that you really enjoyed, or those that didn't work for you? And we'll start with James this time.
Okay. So again, I've discovered several years kind of after it's come out this year was the Yawg, I think it's called, YAWHG, which is this kind of lovely short, I think it's almost like a party game, where the idea is you're playing kind of 4 villagers in this village, and you've got 6 weeks until the Yawg shows up, at which point everything will change, and for the worse. You never specify what that is, just this horrible cyclical event. And so you've got kind of 6 weeks, 6 turns in effect, to kind of move these little people around this village doing kind of specific tasks. Like you can go to the pub and drink, or you can kind of go to, go hunting in the woods, or kind of plant flowers in the garden. Very simple stuff. But you'll get kind of chains of events happening, and they're quite random, and kind of the choices that you make during those events will kind of then affect things that happen later on. You can kind of get cursed with something that ends up 3 turns later exploding and destroying whatever building the character that's afflicted is in. And it's really short. I think you can play in about 20 minutes. And I kind of spent a while going around to friends with my laptop and being come on, we're going to play this. And then finding myself just playing it by myself. And it was the difference between those two experiences, where when it's with friends, it's kind of everyone's laughing, kind of, oh my God, what happens next? Kind of what happens if we make kind of this character do this or go here? Whereas when you're own, it's kind of this meditative experience, some kind of loneliness and the inevitability of the destruction of all things. So yeah, that really worked for me because it was so simple, and yet there was so much emotional kind of intensity in just such simple mechanics.
All right. Were there any games you've played lately or in the past that didn't work for you from a storytelling or narrative perspective?
Ooh.
I know it's always easy to think of the games we like, but when it comes to thinking about the games that don't work or you don't like, we tend to push those to the back of our heads.
Yeah. I think I will pick on one that I did like, but think it fell quite short, which was Pillars of Eternity. Which, I'm a huge fan of Obsidian. One of my favorite games is Mask of the Betrayer. And this was their revival of kind of the Baldur's Gate, Icewind Dale, Planescape Torment games that I loved as a kid. And it's one of those, but I think it was slightly shackled by the fact that it was one of the first big Kickstarters, I'm sure you're aware.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of they promised kind of all kinds of stretch goals. And then I think they were kind of shackled by those because you find there's this plot that's trying to be all things to all people. Like it wants to make sure that you're invested.
Mm-hmm.
So your character's mad and going crazy and also dying of something. And also your soul's being reawakened. And also people are coming to kill you. Like it's like 5 different,
mm-hmm.
hucks going on at once to lead you to the same place. And then you find kind of there's a big city, but because of the stretch goals, another giant city around the corner, and so on and so forth, and a 13-level mega dungeon.
Mm-hmm.
And like lots of these small moments in that game are beautiful, like the music, the art, the kind of emotional range and the nuance of the various side quests. But because it is trying to do so much, it's like all things to all people and not succeeding at really hitting the heights I think it could have.
Mm. Yeah, it's always been hard for me to get into those very massive RPGs like Pillars of Eternity, Baldur's Gate, Neverwinter Nights, etc. They just seem, because I didn't grow up with a pen and paper or hard RPG background, it's always been difficult for me to sit down and play those games. I mean, as an example for me, I cannot get into the games from like Bethesda or Fallout, Elder Scrolls, even something like The Witcher. Like for me, I like to play games that I know. Every time I say that, I know someone's getting ready to write a nasty comment, but I just cannot get into those games. And I was recently trying out, or recently for in relative terms for those of you listening, but a game like Dragon's Dogma, which it's close, but it just doesn't work for me in terms of my background, because I grew up playing mostly action games. So for me, I'm very mechanics driven. I need to, have a very complicated or very tactile feel to my games in a sense. But enough. But again, we can easily jump onto any one of those topics. So let's switch things over. For you, Olivia, any examples of narrative or storytelling games that you liked, and any of those that you didn't like?
I'm actually opening up my Steam and going through one of the really nice things about working in a company where basically everyone knows each other's tastes is I can cheat, and I basically get people to recommend me things I want to play and avoid all the things I won't. So quite a lot of the time when I don't like something, it's because it's been hyped up and not hyped up, even had a deservedly good recommendation, but I've gone in expecting the best thing ever and just gone, it's just good. Just good isn't good enough. So I kind of don't want to name any games because it would be unfair in that sense. But I can bounce off what you were saying about the really big RPGs. I absolutely love them. Mm-hmm. But I've stopped playing them all the way through, and I only ever see like a third of the storyline because I think they've got too big. Mm-hmm. They have fascinating side quests. I'm a side quest person. I love the stories of the people who don't matter. Like in The Witcher 3, there are little side quests that are just people's lives, and they're not really relevant to this grand world-changing thing that's going on. And I absolutely love them because they make the world feel, okay, this is a real world. People live here. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't matter to them which side wins because their life has been ruined either way. And I think that's brilliant. But at the same time, I work in the games industry. I have to play a range of games. And I've spent 100 hours. And you just look at that and go, that's how many days? Fuck. And so I kind of get this horrible tension of, I think these are really good narrative games because they actually reflect not a real world, but they give you the information you need to make it feel real. Mm-hmm. But they're also terrible because I never ever get to finish the main plotline. I have no idea what happens in Skyrim. I've got 110 hours. I've got up to quite a significant event in Witcher 3. I think it's an amazing game. I'm not going to have time to finish it. And it's this kind of tension. This is why these are brilliant narrative games, but also terrible. Because I want to know the end.
But you still have like a good 50 or 100 more hours to play through at that point.
Yeah. I have to do the side quests. It's one of my problems. It's like I'm a to-do list person. I'm like, you've given me a side quest, I will go and do it. I don't have a choice.
Oh, yeah. We talked about that several times on the cast here, but, that the allure of all those goals on your complete list, you have to finish them, even if they're not even worth any more experience anymore. You have to get them off your to-do list.
I was just thinking, as you said that, I do actually have one slightly odd recommendation.
Mm-hmm.
There's an IF game, I think it was even built in Twine, I'm trying to remember, called Birdland by Brendan Patrick Hennessy.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite short, and I'm a big fan of games you can finish fast. It's really weird. It's kind of about the relationships of teenagers at a summer camp, but if I say any more, it'll spoil it. But the things that matter is just words. It's just a really, again, simple, give away any plots, but it's a simple storyline about people. It's not big, it's not world-changing, kind of, and it's beautifully written.
Cool.
And you can finish it in not very long. And to me, that's kind of perfect.
And that's actually gives me a really good springboard for this next question. Obviously, both of you have experience with narrative games, writing for games like that, and along those lines. And one of the things that we've also heard ad nauseum about over the last few years has been the famous debate/question, what is a game? You know, that ever popular topic everyone loves to talk about. And there's always, and especially when it comes to narrative or very short but very intense experiences. A game like Gone Home has a very amazing and fascinating story, but on the flip side, it's about 2 to 3 hours long, maybe a little bit more if you really want to get into it. Same goes for stuff like Dear Esther, Her Story, and many titles that feature these very unique and interesting plot lines, but at the same time may not be, huge time killers. And for both of you, I guess my question is, I know, again, this is going to be either a very long or a very short answer, but I gotta ask, in your opinions, when you hear someone say something, what is a video game? Like, how do you respond to that? And we'll start with Olivia this time.
Depending on the tone in which they say it, depends on how hard I roll my eyes. My background actually includes philosophy, and if you really want to, it's impossible to prove we exist. And you kind of look at this and go, well, why are you going to waste your time discussing this? And that's kind of my attitude to, is this really a game? My attitude is, are you enjoying it? Are you experiencing something? Are you not wasting your time? Are you getting something from it? Does it really matter what you call it? I mean, if it's art, you're paying money for it and you're enjoying it. Okay, if it's a game, same thing. I don't think what matters is the name, but the experience and whether people think it's worthwhile. And even then, it can be a bad game. And I think getting focused on that question kind of is a distraction from making games and playing them, which is the bit I'm interested in. But to be less glib and to not throw away the question, I think short experiences are more powerful because they have to be more potent to be of any value. If you draw something out to 200 hours, it's got to be diluted, because having 200 hours of high intensity emotion would actually be very physically bad for you. You can't keep your adrenaline up. You don't want to be in that kind of aroused emotional state all the time. It's not something that's possible. So to get that kind of thing from games, you kind of need short games. And I try not to be the fangirl about Firewatch, but I noticed you didn't list it. I'm like, Firewatch, totally Firewatch. You can play it in 6 hours, and depending on how you play it, it can be a really, really good emotional experience. And I think you couldn't have had that if it was like a 20-hour game. I think it would have become boring rather than fascinating.
Yeah. I still need to play Firewatch, too. I have not looked at that one yet. For you, James, again, same question. When you hear someone say, what is a game? What goes through your mind?
I'm slightly with Olivia in that I don't think it's the most helpful question to have at the moment. I think at this point, kind of games are a kind of huge medium for all kinds of experiences, arts, entertainment, kind of the whole spectrum. So I feel kind of it's slightly reductive. In terms of what I think a game is, I think, and this is like what I thought about 5 seconds ago, so this could be complete nonsense. But I think it kind of depends on the investment of the player. I think the player has, to a certain extent, have to feel some identification with and some control over the kind of character they are kind of running, even if it's like as simple as just like watch the cutscenes like Final Fantasy and input kind of where you go, control them walking, and add kind of points to the level progression. I think it is just that, because then once you've identified, that allows you to feel kind of, this is happening to you, this is your story, but not quite.
Mm-hmm.
Depends on the game. And I think it is that space that isn't really there in novels and films and TV. You're aware you're watching something happen to someone else, and you have no effect over it, you'll enjoy it, but it's fundamentally a passive well, reading is not that passive, but you get my point.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas games is that sense that you are responsible for what happens. Like, you could just quit, but even on kind of the very basic level, you're controlling who goes where, what happens, do you go this way or that way? And I think that is where the intensity and kind of the quite incisive emotional experiences that games like Gone Home can then open the player up to come from that initial control and that initial identification.
Yeah. And I think Olivia made a really good point talking about, as you just said, James, the amount of intensity that you can have with these narratives. Like, you can't have a 20-hour or 30-hour game with a super intense story that's going to hit you every second that you play. It's just going to be emotionally and physically draining for that. And, excuse me, this brings up the challenge of pacing. Oh my God, my voice just went on 1 second. Wow. 1 second, let me grab a sip of water there.
No problem.
That's what happens when you do daily videos, podcasts, and talks. Your voice just dies on you like that. All right. Sorry about that. Okay. 3, 2, 1. And Olivia made a really good point about how intensive stories can be and why you can't have that as a sustained period. If you play a game with like a very intense story, for 20, 30 hours, it is just an emotional and physical toll on the person. And that actually segues really nicely into talking about pacing when it comes to structuring and writing a story. This is another aspect that I don't think we hear too much about, especially in the video game space. Now, with both of you writing for Fallen London and looking at a game from that point of view, it is very challenging, very interesting to talk about how you structure these stories. And this next question will start with Olivia. When it comes, like as you said earlier, with your role as narrative editor, as you're examining the stories, line by line, and going beyond that with grammar, style, and then how that story flows. My question for you is, how is a story properly paced when we're talking about something that's being written down, as opposed to a traditional game that has, it may have a story, but you also have, 8 to 10 hours of gameplay and level design to fill in?
I think for us, it's actually easier than, say, AAA games with lots of graphics and stuff. And I mean, you'll know too recently that often writers come in and make up the story after the game's basically been created.
Yeah.
So pacing for them is very difficult in that sense because they have no control over it. For us, we've got a vast amount of experience that's handed down to people as they join the company. Chris has been writing for about 10 years and within our world for almost as long. And we kind of just know by feel. We want a story that takes we have a system of branches. So you have the base story alert, then you have the choice and the result. And we'll say, we think this needs about 50 branches. And we'll discuss, okay, how many big decisions, what impact should they have? How many choices do you want to have just as a narrative flavor? How many choices should actually change what's going on? And a lot of that is just the result of experience. I mean, you can work it out by playing it yourself and seeing how it feels. And we do that. But we start from a good position because we've done so many stories before. So a lot of the Fallen London is inherited experience from trial and error. But we're lucky enough that we could do that because the nature of the game is we can get away with trial and error.
All right. And James, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think one of the kind of unique things that we have as writers at Failbetter is that a lot of our design mechanics go into controlling the pacing of the story. Like, we're kind of deciding kind of how long roughly should this section take, how long, what kind of action should players be doing, and how often, how many to progress to the next stage, and then how long should that bit be, and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of, as Olivia says, we have a very powerful tool within our grasp. And I think the thing that occasionally we have to be aware of is, as you were saying earlier, about kind of the difference between writing for London and writing for, say, Sunless Skies, a Mariner, and so on, is that Fallen London, it's a browser game, and players have the kind of inbuilt action refresh thing where they have 20 actions to do things in, and then once they've depleted those actions, another one will come along in, say, 10 minutes or so, and they've got to wait for them to refresh. And it's also a browser game, so the gameplay is the reading the stories and taking those actions, whereas something like Mariner, Sunless Sea, there is I don't want to say the actual gameplay, but there is kind of moving from port to port. If your story takes place, say, on the Isle of Cats here, and then you have to go to Varkas or back to Fallen London, then gameplay is happening within those gaps. Between the ports, there is, they'll attack a beastie, they'll kind of get distracted, an event will happen while they're on board, they'll get back to Fallen London, a crisis occurs, and there's all of this stuff going on outside of the story, which is true to Fallen London as well to an extent, but not in the same way. And it's taking that into account when you're writing that kind of story that I think informs the pacing more.
All right. And moving or springboarding from that question, this is another one of those questions I think could either be really long or really short, but as someone who doesn't come from a writing or a fiction-based background, this is a question I was kind of curious about. As we just said regarding pacing, like with a game like Fallen London, you have the advantage of the branch system and being able to have sort of a quantitative number that you can use in terms of determining how long your story is, how much you want to put into that. And as you just said, James, regarding Sunless Skies, you can build it around these different ports and then just knowing how there is gameplay going to be happening between the different branches when you're out on this, or the different areas or points of interest while you're out on the sea. So for this question, again, as someone without a background in heavy writing, I'm just curious, like in your personal opinions, how do you feel like when a story is just taking too long? It just feels like it's just spinning its wheels. And this can be, we can easily extend this out beyond just video games, but just in terms of books, TV shows, movies, anything like that. And we'll start with James this time.
Okay, I mean, the basic metric for my own writing is when Olivia looks over and glares at me. I think you can tell when something's spinning its wheels when you kind of extraneous detail starts filtering in. Like, I'm not a fan of Game of Thrones, but I think George R. R. Martin is like your standout example of that. Like when kind of earlier books, you'll say like character A needs to get to location in King's Landing or whatever. They're there. Like the entire journey is just done in a paragraph, couple lines, whatever. And then as kind of scroll happens and kind of the plot clearly becomes more complicated, then it's kind of whole chapters will go by just on the journey. I think you can tell when a story is spinning its wheels when unnecessary details get focused on. I think a good story and a good, like, well-paced story hits on, like, it sounds really easy to say, and like as a writer you kind of spend a lot of time pulling your hair out over this, but you need to hit the important beats and identify those early. What is the story about? What is important? What does the reader need to know? And then make sure you're kind of progressing through those points. And the stuff where you're kind of like trying to figure out how to get from point A to point B isn't that important.
Yeah. And again, it's one of those topics that it's very hard to describe in some cases when it works. It's the same thing with video games. Like, it's easy to say, like, as I was saying a few minutes ago, James, it's easy for us to remember when something works, when a game we like. But then when you have to think about when something doesn't work, it becomes that much harder. And pacing is definitely one of those very abstract or intangible topics to talk about in some cases. Like, even for me, like, it's very hard for me to think about when a story feels like it's moving along at a decent pace. I think your example of Game of Thrones is really good. I mean, I've been watching a lot of TV shows, especially some of the stuff that's on like primetime these days, where it feels like you can't just have one story. Like, it takes them forever to like say, or I guess that's a good point. It's like it's an hour-long show, but maybe only 10 minutes of actual plot gets moved forward. The rest of it is just them like talking or, again, like spinning their wheels with another topic or some other diversion that has nothing relating to the whole plot that we were sitting down to watch. But for you, Olivia, what do you think about that kind of pacing, or when a story just seems to just get stuck in itself?
To no one's surprise, I have very strong opinions. I want to go in two ways, so I'll start with one. I don't think it's necessarily about not having a plot. I think something could be an interesting story and not having a plot, simply because it could be about relationships and people talking. I really enjoyed like the first few episodes of House, because even though there's basically no story, it's about the people involved and the characters. I think it can work. It depends on what the point of the actual experience is. But as an editor, it's quite hard for me to express it because I do edit by feelsies. And this is one of those things that triggers imposter syndrome, in that it's very hard for me to explain how I do my job. But basically, if I've started reading and I've forgotten to make comments, I get quite cross because I'm like, shit, this is so good, I have to go back and reread it slower. That's a really good paced story because I'm in it, I'm focused in it, and I've forgotten that I'm supposed to be working. If I'm just making sarcastic comments, then it's too slow because I'm starting to entertain myself with my own wit. And generally I have to go back and moderate it so I don't make the writers cry. But basically, my way of telling for myself is, am I being sarcastic? Am I being smug in my editorial comments? Right, the pacing's off. And I go, look, guys, you've got to cut it. This is why. Here are all my rude remarks. So it's basically, if you can trick me into enjoying it as a story while I'm working, then you've got an excellent pace. But that doesn't really help anyone.
And I think it'd be a really good point about like shows like House that focus on a very episodic or very much a template for their storytelling. Every episode of House usually follows the same beats, at least in the early season. And then, as you said, Olivia, that it's more about the characters and how they interact with each other and those developing stories that keep you invested. And it is very hard, or it's very interesting to write stories like that when you're going from either a very episodic story where each episode essentially has to move the greater plot along versus more of these self-contained, or again, very much a template kind of plot from episode to episode. Now, let me see here. We are approaching about 50 minutes in. I know you guys will probably have to get going in a few minutes. So we'll begin to, I think, wrap things up. Before, I guess for both of you, are there any like narrative or any topics in general that we haven't touched on that you would like to bring up now? And we'll start with James.
Sure. I think we could talk about mood and tone possibly, and also maybe historical fiction. Okay.
All right. So with like the mood or the tone of the story, that has definitely been more interesting as we've been seeing games trying to quote unquote push the limits. And it's one of those very polarizing topics for some people regarding just how far you can go with certain topics, certain storytelling. With Gone Home, for instance, there's a minor outcry over the LGBT themes of that game, and there are some people who loved and praised the game for it. And as we were seeing, especially in the independent space, more developers and especially more writers are trying to make more hot topics or more polarizing topics among either very gruesome acts or very personal or sensitive topics. Last year, of course, I think this year, there was a game, That Dragon Cancer, dealing with the death of a son due to cancer. And it's, again, that kind of mood and the tone of a game, especially with a story, can really affect how people perceive it. I think we talked about, or Cash and I talked about this last time regarding the challenges of writing very controversial or very polarizing topics because they have to be handled with a very careful hand. If you don't do that, you can end up writing something that seems to either mock or simply there to be controversial for controversy's sake. And I guess we'll start with Olivia this time. The question is, when it comes to these kinds of stories where you're trying to make something that is polarizing or controversial, how does a good writer, I guess, navigate those waters?
I'd say it's about talking to people who those stories directly impact in real life and listening. And if you've got the wrong idea, being willing to change your mind, be silent, think about it, and sometimes being willing not to write the story at all. Writers should definitely write what they don't know, but they should research it with respect. I think that's sometimes where the problem is people write about something they care about and they want to do good for, and they forget to actually check whether the people they're trying to help want their help, or want to be perceived in a certain way. Like, it's quite risky to try and evoke sympathy because you might evoke pity, and they're close emotions that can have a very different impact on people. I'd say just talk to people and listen more of any topic you want to cover, and really research things. All right.
And for you, James?
Yeah, I mean, I'd underline everything Olivia just said and kind of triple underline it and possibly in like sparkly highlighter. I think it's important, and it depends on your definition of controversial. Like, I think with the example of Gone Home, like, if that kind of thing shocks you, that you're quite sheltered. Like, I think some topics are going to be inherently controversial for the moment based on what they are. Like, Siege of Dragonspear, the new Baldur's Gate that came out a few months ago, got into tremendous flack just for having a transgender character. And it wasn't terribly well presented in terms of it was just like 3 dialogue branches and like third one into the kind of linked series. She announces she's transgender and that's it. There's nothing else to that character. And I think, like Olivia was saying, it's a little clunky. Like, I can see why they did it. I can see the need for representation. But if you're going to do it right. Make sure the character has a purpose. They're not just there to be the token one. It's a very obvious point. But I think kind of being aware of why you're telling a certain story. Are you the right person to tell it? Be aware that you might make mistakes. Own up to them if they happen. I think you should be allowed, as a writer and as someone kind of trying to kind of highlight controversial topics, you should be given, I think in some cases, the benefit of the doubt. A little bit of leeway, kind of, well, you can make a mistake. This wasn't well handled, but we're not going to excoriate for you. But I think
you can't see me nodding, but I'm nodding quite heavily.
Yeah, but at the same time, the writer also needs to act in really good faith and properly research, properly ask themselves the right questions. Is this what I should be doing? Am I the right person? As I was saying, is it my voice that's being amplified here over someone else's, or am I genuinely kind of reaching out?
Yeah. And avoiding that kind of tokenism, that is a challenge in of itself, and a topic that I definitely want to explore more. We did a cast about this a few months ago, but again, if we start getting on that topic, we'll be here for probably another 30, 40 minutes. But I think you made a really good point there, James, about, again, that is this character being written because you really want this character in there, they serve a point to the story or to the world, or are you just writing it, to check off a list of, we need to have an LGBT character, we need to have a character who has a bad childhood, we need to have a character who's going to be your cocky, wisecracking friend, that kind of thing. And you can really tell in a lot of cases when the story works versus when it just feels like, again, you're just checking off the narrative tokenism checklist. Now, I guess I'm trying to think if there's anything else regarding mood or tone. Olivia, do you have any other topics you would like to bring up before we start to wrap things up?
Not anything that wouldn't be a massive, long topic all by itself. I was thinking about all the mood and tone, and it's all indies who appear to be taking the risks.
Yeah.
And I do wonder if AAA sometimes get a bit too much stick for this, because indies, it tends to be only, 2 to 20 people whose actual livelihoods are at risk. And I think there's a horrible bind that AAAs are in, that they can't take risks because they've got the same kind of budget as Hollywood blockbuster films.
Yeah.
And if they fail to sell, then they're not destroying 20 people's lives. It's 200 to 1,000. And I think they have a place as well. And they shouldn't always be held up to the same narrative standards as indies, because they don't have the space. They have other advantages, brilliant advantages, but they almost serve a different purpose.
Yeah, and I think one of the advantages that we as indies have, is especially for something like writing the content, the way we write content, is we can change it quite easily. It's easy enough for us to go in, because we are text-based, and adjust things based on criticism, or experiment. If something doesn't work, well, we don't have to rewrite the entire game. Whereas, like in AAA studio, obviously there's a kind of voice acting budget, art. Half the game's already been built by the time something's in. So I don't think there's that much acceptance that sometimes something might not have gone out the way people wanted, but at that point, the cost of undoing something is potentially catastrophic to the project.
Yeah, but Olivia made, I think, a really good point there regarding that difference between the AAA and the independent space. We've talked about this on several casts. I want to say it was either Liam or Cash that we talked about that difference as well. That what we see is that the independent space has really become the trend makers, in a matter of speaking. They're the ones, as you said, Olivia, they're able to take those risks because, again, it's a small team compared to, 75, 100 plus employees, and I don't even want to think about some of these budgets that they have when it comes to making a game. In independent space, if you need to make those changes, you're nimble and small enough that you can make them without too much effort. But as you just said, James, that if you have like a 200-man project and they need to change a level or change an art style, it's like trying to, turn a train around. It's just going to go completely off the track. And the risk level in the AAA space, especially in today's market, is still very high. As you said, if a AAA game fails, that can easily be a studio closer. If a smaller independent game fails, it's usually small enough that they're not going to take, as deadly of a hit compared to, again, a million or several $1 million project. But I think with that said, again, we can easily, if we're not careful, we can just keep talking and go on for who knows how long. And again, we are dealing with, of course, the lovely time zone difference. I'm curious, what time is it for both of you right now?
10 to 9.
Coming up to 9 o'clock.
Yeah, it's just after, or it's not even 4 o'clock here. So I'm sure both of you have to get ready go to bed and get ready for work tomorrow. So I don't want to keep you all night for both of you.
I am definitely not planning to stay up late playing games.
I'm going to be up late playing games. So I got to get some videos and streams going today. But let's wrap it up here. Again, we can easily jump on a number of topics, and it's always great to hang out with everyone from Failbetter. As I said at the start, maybe one day we'll just have just get everyone on at one time and just see what happens there. Chris can talk about Dark Souls for an hour, and we can have our own little conversation while he's doing that. But to wrap things up then, for both of you, do you have any final thoughts or anything you'd like to say to the fans who might be listening? And we'll start with Olivia.
If they're Fallen London fans, they're clearly amazing and distinguished individuals with exceptional taste. Thank you.
Awesome. And for you, James?
Yeah, if any fans are listening, kind of thank you for all your support and for being such wonderful people.
All right. Great words. And I'm sure we have plenty of fans listening. And I'm also doubly sure that we got people who are certainly excited about what's going to happen with Sunless Skies. I guess sort of a final question then, because we didn't touch on this too much. As I said, we are recording this in early December, and most likely late December, early January, guys, or people will be listening to this cast. Are there any announcements or any teasers you would like to mention about what's coming in either Fall in London or Sunless Sea? As we said, Sunless Skies is still too early to be making hard details about right now.
The current season of exceptional friendship stories are interesting and gently tied in. That's about all I can say.
All right, and for you, James?
Yeah. I was going to say, the next exceptional friendship story coming out is mine, and I'm really excited for it, and so should everyone else.
Awesome. All right, so with that, we will wrap things up for this week's cast. Again, Olivia, James, thank you so much for coming on. I think we had a great cast, and as I just said, it's always great hanging out with the folks of Failbetter.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Not a problem. So, for everyone listening, we're going to end things here. As always, if you'd like to support Game Wisdom, there are several options available. If you'd like to be a guest for either one of our live discussions or podcasts, and of course, write a guest piece, you can find information and links under Submissions Wanted. We are always looking for new people to talk to. We can turn just about any topic into an hour, 2 hour long discussion. And again, for Chris, if you're listening, there's always Dark Souls we can talk about at some point. But feel free to shoot me a message either through Game Wisdom or email josh@game-wisdom.com. If you'd like to follow me, you can find me on Twitch and Twitter under GW Beiser for updates when new content comes out and thoughts from me throughout the day. Be sure to check out the ever-growing Game Wisdom YouTube channel, which as we're recording is getting very close to 1,000 and may hit 1,000 subscribers by the time you're listening to this cast. You'll find daily videos on games, as well as daily vlogs on a variety of game design topics. And last but not least, be sure to check out the Patreon campaign. You can find me on there under Game Wisdom. Donations will be greatly appreciated as they will allow me to keep doing what I'm doing. And we can hit some goals. It will mean expanding the content and adding more for everyone to enjoy. So, with all that said, once again, James, Olivia, it was great hanging out with you, and hopefully we can do something like this again soon, or in time for when there's more details regarding Sunless Skies.
Yeah, I'd love to do it then, because it's going to be so cool.
Great. And I've been saving some questions for you guys regarding Sunless Skies and Kickstarter, so when that time comes, I'll be ready to hit you guys with a bunch of questions.
Cool. We'll be ready.
All right. So, once again, thank you so much for listening to this week's cast. As always, hope you have a great rest of the week, and we will talk to you again next time. Have a great night, folks.